Africa will not rise until Africans change. PLO Lumumba. Africa is not poor. Africa is poorly led. And until Africans themselves change, no outsider will save this continent. Professor PLO Lumumba. Think about that. A continent with oil, gold, diamonds, fertile soil, and the youngest population in the world, yet still battling poverty, unemployment, corruption, and division. Why is this so? And what must Africans do to truly rise? Today we dive deep into the powerful words of Professor PLO Lumumba. Africa will not rise until Africans change. For those who don't know him, Professor PLO Lumumba is one of Africa's most fearless voices. A Kenyan lawyer, scholar, and Pan-Africanist, he has spent decades warning us that Africa's biggest problem is not lack of resources, but lack of leadership, integrity, and unity. He challenges us to look within, not to wait for the West, not to wait for China, not to wait for foreign aid. His message is simple but urgent. If Africans do not change, Africa will remain stuck. The curse of leadership. Professor Lumumba often says, Africa is crying for leaders who love her, not leaders who loot her. The truth is painful. Many African leaders come to power not to serve, but to enrich themselves, their families, and their tribes. Elections, instead of being about ideas, often become about ethnicity and money. Citizens vote for their man rather than the best leader. And after the elections, people suffer under corruption, unemployment, and broken promises. Take a moment to compare. Singapore and Kenya had the same GDP in the 1960s. Today, Singapore is a global powerhouse, while Kenya, like many African nations, still struggles with poverty. The difference? Leadership. Lumumba reminds us, until Africa produces leaders with vision, discipline, and integrity, Africa cannot rise. Corruption. Africa's silent killer. Another truth Lumumba exposes is corruption. He says, in many African countries, corruption is not just an act, it is a culture. Think about it. Billions are lost each year through theft and bribery. A road budgeted for $10 million ends up half finished because half the money is stolen. Hospitals lack medicine because funds disappear. Schools crumble while politicians drive expensive cars. But here's the hardest truth. Corruption doesn't start only with leaders. It starts with citizens. When we pay bribes to police, when we vote for money, when we stay silent instead of demanding accountability, we are part of the problem. Lumumba's warning is clear. Africa cannot rise until Africans reject corruption in all its forms. Mental colonization. Another powerful idea. Mental slavery. Lumumba says Africans must decolonize their minds. Yes, political independence was achieved decades ago, but many Africans are still mentally colonized. We still believe progress must come from outside. We still look to Europe, to America, to China, for aid, for direction, for validation. But look at history. Japan was destroyed in World War II, yet within a generation the Japanese rebuilt their nation into one of the world's strongest economies. How? They believed in themselves. Meanwhile, African countries still beg for loans, still rely on imports, still see foreign as better than local. Lumumba insists, until Africans free their minds and trust their own abilities, Africa will never rise. The role of youth. Africa is the youngest continent. Over 60% of Africans are under 25. That's not a curse, that's an opportunity. Lumumba says, if the young men and women of Africa do not rise, Africa will die on her knees. The youth are the future, but too often they are trapped in unemployment, hopelessness, or the dream of escaping abroad. Many risk their lives crossing deserts and seas, chasing opportunities in Europe, while Africa's potential is wasted. But there's another side. Across Africa, young people are building startups, creating technology, leading protests, and shaping culture. Kenya gave the world mobile money. Nigeria is shaping global music and film. Young Africans are proving what is possible. Lumumba calls on youth. Don't copy the corrupt habits of the past. Be different. Be bold. Be honest. Because Africa's rise depends on you. Unity versus division. Another key theme is unity. Lumumba warns Africa must unite or perish. Look at the map. More than 50 nations divided by borders drawn in Europe during colonialism. These divisions weaken us. Africa trades more with Europe and China than with itself. Africans need visas to visit neighboring countries while foreigners travel freely. Disunity means weakness. A divided Africa is easy to exploit. A united Africa would be unstoppable. Imagine an Africa with one strong voice in global politics. An Africa trading within itself, producing its own goods, speaking as one people. That is Lumumba's vision, a Pan-African future. The role of citizens. But Lumumba insists, don't just blame leaders. Ordinary citizens must change too. He says, a corrupt leader thrives in a corrupt society. If citizens demand money for their votes, they can't expect honest leaders. If we cheer for politicians who belong to our tribe, even when they are corrupt, we are guilty too. Change is not only for presidents and ministers. Change starts with us, refusing to pay bribes, demanding justice, holding leaders accountable, voting with wisdom. Africa will rise when Africans themselves rise. The vision for Africa. So what does Lumumba see for Africa's future? He sees an Africa that is self-reliant, united, innovative, and respected. An Africa that feeds itself, powers itself, and leads itself. He sees an Africa that no longer waits for outsiders, but creates its own destiny. And he reminds us, the day Africans change, the world will respect Africa. Africa's story is not yet finished, but the message is clear. Africa will not rise until Africans change. We must change leadership from selfishness to service. We must change corruption into integrity. We must change our mindset from dependency to self-reliance. We must change division into unity. And above all, we must believe in Africa again. The destiny of this continent is in African hands. Now I ask you, what do you think Africa must change first? Leadership, corruption, unity, or mindset? Comment your thoughts below. If you believe Africa deserves better, share this video with your friends. Subscribe for more wisdom from Professor PLO Lumumba and other African voices. And remember Lumumba's powerful words, Africa's story will be written by Africans themselves.